Hi there, I'm Steve Smith, CEO of Airlink, and thank you for joining me for another episode of FlightPath. Here we aim to highlight innovation, deliver insight, actionable guidance, and lessons in best practice to people working in the humanitarian response and disaster logistics space, all from experienced organizational leaders. And please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. My guest today has spent time as a social worker in Germany, co-founded and led Social Force, a startup empowering small businesses to create local impact, and worked on corporate strategy, as well as launched a think tank at one of the largest companies in Germany, Deutsche Bahn. Today, she heads up flexport.org, and not only heads it, but actually founded it. Susy Schoneberg, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much for having me, and congratulations to this great series.
Oh, great. Thanks so much. Susy, just for the benefit of those who might not be familiar with flexport.org and, of course, flexport.com, perhaps you can tell us a little bit about them.
Absolutely. Flexport is a technology-enabled freight forwarder. This means that we have companies and other organizations to get their goods from A to B. So imagine you order your product as a factory, and we bring it all the way to the warehouse and manage all the processes related to this. So this can be clearance, customs, helping you to finance it, and of course, managing all the things related to the logistics.
Right.
In addition, we develop technology. So all of our clients get access to our platform that we also use internally so that they have full visibility with regards to their shipments. Flexport.org is the social impact group at Flexport, and we focus on social and environmental issues in logistics and also offer services for humanitarian aid.
Oh, great. And so, and Flexport in general is quite a forward-leaning organization in terms of the business and the freight forwarding industry sector that you are in, right?
Absolutely, and that got me really excited about the company as well. As you just said, I have prior experience in logistics. What really stood out to me about Flexport is that one, they started to really embrace technology and build the whole company around that. And as you know, they also built in sustainability into the business model from the very beginning. And we built specifically part of our company and technology around helping nonprofit organizations.
That's great. That's great. You know, we have the good fortune of working in an incredibly dynamic sector where people are starting new initiatives all the time. And perhaps it's because disaster response NGOs exist in a world of creative chaos and scarce resources. I've been at Airlink for a number of years now, but I wasn't the founder of the organization. That honor goes to Bob Brown, who I think you know, a very inspirational individual on many levels. But I'm always very interested in the journey that people take from passive acknowledgement of a problem to creating a new organization that addresses the problem. As I mentioned in your at the opening here, Susy, you're not only the head of flexport.org, but you are the founder of it. Tell me a little bit about the journey you took and what inspired you to create flexport.org.
As you mentioned, I started as a social worker, and what that meant, I was really close to the impact and had a lot of one-to-one conversations. But this resulted in kind of quite some limited impact, right? There are only so many people and children I can talk to every day. And with many of them, I worked over years, further reducing the people I can reach. And when, in my studies, I learned one of the few topics that economists agree on is that trade lifts people out of poverty. And so I was always curious about just the role of global trade. Later on, I learned that many nonprofit organizations that are kind of service-oriented spend actually a good amount of their budget on getting goods, so procuring them, and also then transporting them to people in need. And there didn't seem to be a strong focus on actually helping them to reduce those costs, at least from the freight forwarding side, on a continuous basis. So not only for the disaster, but in the long term. And given what we have built at Flexport, I was curious, to see if we can use the benefit that we see for our commercial clients, if we can also apply this to nonprofit organizations. And so we started our journey actually at the height of the Syrian civil war. And we were approached by an organization that asked us to bring medical supplies to refugee camps in Jordan and Turkey. And so we worked with them, delivered the goods. And the feedback that we have gotten after working together was that the visibility we provide literally saves lives on the ground. Oftentimes in disaster cases, and you know this really well, you also work with a lot of volunteers, right? To try to get kind of responders to those places. And there is this good amount of chaos that you described. And it really matters to know when something arrives and what is actually coming, right? Are you getting medical supplies? And maybe they even need to be stored at a certain temperature. Is it food that you want to give out right away? And so after we got this feedback, we took a lot of time of talking to the nonprofits, understanding how we can create value for them. And this is subsequently what we built.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, it's very much we see pictures of individuals being affected on the ground. We see it on the news. And we see people with going in and helping those individuals, whether it's doctors, nurses, but there's not much thought given to how all of these things arrive, right? It's sort of behind the scenes, and it's yes, that's the business and the sector you're in. That's a sector that Airlink is in too. And not to be self-serving, but that's part of why why I assume you do this is because it's absolutely critical, and there's can be tremendous waste in and inefficiencies, and so I know that that's something that that you're very focused on. Or it seems so.
Yeah, and it's true that the cost of shipping, right, and this is where Airlink just also plays this tremendous role of bringing down those costs, but also the complexity of shipping sometimes prevent organizations from delivering goods either as fast as they want to or the amount of product, right? And what we also do at flexpo.org is we see a lot of commercial customers or clients that have excess inventory, the goods that there are many reasons for why they might not sell all the goods or have some product at their warehouses. And instead of burning the goods, we want to make sure that this gets into the hands of folks who need the product. And companies are willing to donate the product, but maybe not always to take care of the shipping. Right, so they're busy, and by filling this logistics gap, we can make sure that nonprofits can focus on their core programs, and we know that more people will be in need, right? If you look at the number of refugees, natural disasters, so it's really, really, really impactful to make this process more effective and efficient for them, so that we can reach more communities.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, it's quite a simple thought to get things to people that need them, move excess things to people that need them, but it's really not that easy. So that's really really great and really important what you guys are doing. I think it was Winston Churchill who said that success was going from failure to failure without the loss of enthusiasm. So most successful ventures stand on the ashes of a dozen failures. And so when you look back at establishing flexport.org, I wonder if you could think of some obstacles that you encountered and maybe talk us through how you address those and what got you to where you are today.
So a good amount of work that we do relates to disaster relief. And as you know, you can't plan where a disaster happens. And, in what region, it might be a new kind of country that you're less established in. And what the circumstances are, right? So for example, if we look back at the kind of the current pandemic that we're fighting, we faced new problems. And here, for example, the problem was that suddenly we didn't have any air freight capacity, right? And during one of the last episodes, you talked with someone about kind of the air freight capacity and how this was reduced. So there are always new circumstances. And so what I have learned with regards to earlier failures was it is very important to build a very strong partner network, right, in organizations you work with to collect as much information as possible and then also share them with your network so that you can quickly iterate on those fast developing circumstances. So probably the early obstacles that we faced is we were a new organization and we had to slowly build kind of this trusted network. And over time, this allowed us to respond way faster, right? So we went from more being a passive player, maybe kind of, for the responses, to being more proactive. And so for this past pandemic, for COVID-19, we actually started our response proactively end of January, so pretty early on after we heard about this, in China, right? Because we started by bringing medical supplies to Wuhan.
Yeah.
And build capacity early, right? We contacted, Airlink, and we were in conversations. And we also developed just like our playbook of how we work together over time, so that now if a new disaster hits, we can respond very quickly.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's great. And so, recently working in partnership with the Clinton Foundation and Clinton Global Initiative, Airlink surveyed disaster relief organizations, many of them that you work with, many of them that we work with. And the results show that 75% of those organizations have been forced to change their funding goals for 2020, and that 65% of those response organizations are extremely concerned about meeting those 2020 goals and beyond. So recently, you launched something called the Frontline Responders Fund, and you've raised a tremendous amount of money. Congratulations. What lessons do you think NGOs can learn from your success?
That's a really good question. So first of all, I think it's important to acknowledge that by kind of joining forces, you can tap into new networks, right? So oftentimes, I know that Airlink is doing kind of tremendous work, and for everyone who hasn't in the past, please go and support Airlink. So that's right, kind of a network that you have. But by us kind of starting this fundraiser, we got in touch with folks that maybe didn't know the nonprofit organizations that we were supporting, and they looked for a way to help but didn't know how. So we just provided a very tangible kind of vehicle for folks who said, I want to do something, and said a very impactful way that you can fight this pandemic right now is help us with this fundraiser. And then, we help to charter planes and get as many supplies to this location as possible. So I think, tying it back to a tangible outcome, and then just like using different organizations that might reach different people can be really, really powerful.
Yeah. Dare I say, you made logistics and air freight very exciting for many people. So well done. That's something that's quite the art. But seriously, very critical. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. What was your failure that you learned from? I would love to hear from you as well.
Oh goodness. Well, there's many. I mean, I think that I think you're right. I think it's about having the right partners in place. And sometimes you come across new situations, new disasters, and I think that it's really about having good, robust partnerships that you've put in place beforehand, that you can depend upon, because unfortunately, and is part of one of the systemic issues within nonprofit humanitarian response sector is funding. Nobody has enough of it. Everybody wants more of it. They'll never have enough of it. And so you do need to do as much as you can, and be creative. And so I think that, this isn't supposed to be a plug about Airlink or our partnership, but we value our partnership with Flexport and all the things we've done together. I think that's really important, and it takes time to realize that. And even though you may come up with a great concept, if you don't have the right partners in place, it's just a bunch of words on a page. Yep. So thank you for repurposing my own question back on me. Good one. So you touched on something earlier. I'd like to revisit. It's estimated that 60% of donated items arriving at disaster sites cannot be used immediately, and often have to be destroyed or sent back. And I think I actually read this in an article you wrote. Where do you see the fundamental problems for humanitarian aid and disaster response in the way that they consider and pursue logistical requirements? And in your view, why does this keep not getting addressed correctly?
I will address this question maybe in two parts. So one is just, if we think about who's sending supplies, some of those supplies are being donated by companies, oftentimes if they see something in the news, they want to help immediately. But if you imagine, a flood, for example, you don't need new furniture and mattresses right away, but maybe in 3 months when kind of reconstruction starts. So it's really hard sometimes to explain that, recovery and response is kind of a long-term play. And while there is a lot of attention in the beginning, for your company specifically, action might be needed later.
Yeah.
Or it's donations, right, that are you talked about fundraising that are needed right now. So I think for us, one of the tasks that we're taking on is to kind of inform companies when their goods are needed based on the signals that we receive from humanitarian aid organizations. So we really rely on information that we're getting from them. We see ourselves as kind of a service organizations to all the great, fantastic nonprofits that do the ground kind of on the work and bring this back to the companies. If we now talk about logistics and nonprofits, it's no wonder that it's really complicated, right? Because again, like the tools, like having visibility, shipping is very, very complex. And so what we try to do is just like to really make it easy, because we know there might be, different staff members, right? So if there's kind of turnover, then it's hard to relearn all the processes. So I think humanitarian aid organizations can really benefit from the new options that are out there right now, right? Like platforms. And they can also benefit from organizations like Airlink, who already take on some of the coordination work, right? And kind of join those networks to just like make the whole coordination a little bit easier.
Yeah, because I think the reality is that there's no humanitarian organization out there that is everywhere and does everything, right? So when a disaster occurs, which there are some vulnerable places in the world that these things occur when we're talking about natural disasters, but oftentimes nobody has any idea of when and where they're going to hit, and so that's kind of interesting and related to your your mission. And the work of FLIGHTPATH.com, the commercial side of the organization, because you are shipping things on an ongoing basis to various different places, and so when a disaster occurs, that's a great network to be able to tap into, right?
Absolutely, and then there's also the whole kind of area around regulation and customs. Those tend to change frequently, right? Especially depending on the region. So there's a lot of expertise that we can also just like lend and provide by doing this. As you just said, we're shipping every day, so we're happy to share this expertise.
Yeah, that's right. No, that's great. That's great. And so, speaking of I think the connection between the two organizations, the .com and the .org, as you refer to them. Maybe you could sort of elaborate a little bit on how those sort of the symbiosis of that occurs, especially across when you correlate it to the NGO landscape. Considering the financial constraints that they're all now facing based on the studies we know and many other studies as well. Is there a similar type model that NGOs should think about within the business sector?
So we really benefit from being associated with Flexport in general. So we are using the infrastructure that Flexport is building. We're using the technology, all the subject matter experts that I just mentioned for all the different transportation modes, but also compliance and customs. And what it means is that all the funds that we are raising, we are 100% deploying for supporting shipments. So my salary is covered by Flexport, right? And so all of our other costs are all covered by Flexport. And so everything else that we are generating goes 100% to humanitarian aid shipments. So that's a really, really powerful. I think when we think about how we can translate this to nonprofits, is in two ways. One, it could maybe just like inform their choice of partners. So the way how Flexport.org is set up, right? We are not only kind of doing this work once or twice a year if like a big disaster happens, but we kind of ship every day, and we have a very sustainable model, right? Because we have kind of the support and kind of we can use this network. We're here for the long term. No organization that we are working with has to be afraid that we might not exist anymore if times are getting tough, right? So we will be around and do this work and even do more of this work.
It's good to know. Good.
So this could be great for just like, selecting a partner, right? And can you rely on them supporting you in a similar way in the long run, right? Or is it only project based? And because like that's tough, right? If you only get support for a certain project and then it's not being maintained, especially if you rely, let's say, on our platform for analytics and getting information, you want to make sure that this is staying around, right? If you're using this. So I think it's, just like interesting to kind of select a partner, that a corporate maybe partner or someone with a similar setup that you're working with to do their full-time staff. We have even engineers on our team that build software specifically for nonprofits. Yeah. And then for the funding model for nonprofits, I think it's a good idea to think about, which companies are investing in initiatives and might provide long-term, reoccurring, sustainable support.
Yeah, that's an important topic, right? Sustainability, because the entire sector is focused on donations and philanthropy, and so that's been very challenging, especially recently with the entire globe affected by COVID-19, and giving patterns have been significant. So sustainability is probably the big issue that everyone will focus on, as in terms of running the organizations and longevity.
And we hope that we can help, right, to kind of bridge some of those gaps by the work that we do, right? Because basically everything that we do and everything that we fundraise is basically for those organizations, right? Because again, we invest all kind of our funds 100% into enabling logistics and humanitarian aid shipments.
That's good stuff. Well, let me change modes a little bit. Recently, you kicked off an initiative, or maybe for a little while you've been doing this, to offset up to 100% of carbon emissions, shipping-related carbon emissions. Very bold initiative. Could you tell us a little bit more about how this works?
Yeah, I would love to. So in general, we know that the emissions from logistics are significant. By 2050, it's estimated that 40%, so almost half of all global carbon emissions, will come from international transportation. So this is definitely, if you want to reduce emission, this is where it's at. And the reason for this is that other big sources that we know, like energy production or even passenger transport, oftentimes there are already some solutions on the horizon, right? So we might be able to electrify cars and produce energy for renewables. But for the planes, and this best, there is no short-term solution. For now, we have to burn fuel. And so what we do is, one, we calculate the carbon emissions on a very detailed level. So for each response, for all the goods you're sending, what the carbon emissions are. So this is one, and we provide this information for free. We can also provide this information for shipments that are not with us, right? So it doesn't have to be a Flexport shipment. We can do this for your whole organization. And then we give you the option to not only kind of think about how you can reduce emissions by maybe changing the transportation mode, if that's possible, or consolidate, but also then to offset the emissions, right? For now, given that we have to cause kind of emissions, it's important to still take action, and we make the process really seamless. There's reporting that shows you each quarter what you're kind of achieving. And the initiative that you were talking about is, we want to be a good example. So of course, organizations we work with can choose to opt in to those carbon offsets, but we already go ahead and so make certain transportation modes carbon neutral, and all of our disaster relief shipments are carbon neutral as well, meaning we bear the costs. And the reason for this is that we just know that a lot of disasters are caused or can be related to kind of the increase in carbon emissions. And so we think it's really important to kind of, also work on the costs for the disasters and do what we can.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
And
very
we know
interesting.
That many nonprofits are also now looking at the environmental component, right, and kind of the impact that they have on communities. So we really hope to support those initiatives.
Yeah, it's an interesting balance, isn't it? Because there's the do I, if the needs are significant enough, and if I have the means to launch and send a big airplane load of supplies, I could do that. Arguably, I could do that. But is it the right thing to do? Are there supplies and the key things close by? Certainly localization within response is the way to go. But international shipments are still critical, and they will be for the foreseeable future. But it's kind of a constant balance between, do I have the resources? Can I go do it? Versus should I go do it? And I know that that's something the NGOs will always battle with on some level.
Yeah, and I think this is why we love to work with Airlink, right? Because the focus is on air freight, which in disaster cases, this is oftentimes the only option, just like, how timely it is. Sometimes just like a lot of goods you have to transport, and then given the infrastructure, air freight might be the easiest option. But I also know that Airlink is always really creative, and also like, we're working together to always find the best solution for organizations to also provide this long-term support. And that's, I think, the important thing about our carbon offset program. We're not saying air freight is just like bad per se, and you should never do this. It's impossible. We need air freight, but there are still actions you can take. And we know that airlines are looking at this topic. And so we're working with our airline partners to also support their programs, right? And make sure that their customers know about the great work that they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, and sometimes it's absolutely right. Sometimes air freight is not the answer, right? Putting it on the ocean is much slower, but if you have the time, it's a lot cheaper as well, and a lot less impactful to the environment. So, I always like to end on a positive note. Not that our interview has been negative in any way. It's good, great talking with you. But as you look to the future, what excites you in the logistics and NGO space?
I'm just excited about kind of the new collaboration that I'm seeing. I know that this has been a topic that has been discussed for a really long time, as well as enabling more local organizations, right, and working together with smaller organizations. But I'm seeing like giving, again, the platforms that we have to work together this is becoming a reality right now. And so I'm really, really hopeful that by being in a constant communication, we can be more efficient and reach more folks. Because unfortunately, I think we still have to respond. I wish that my job wouldn't exist and wouldn't be needed. Unfortunately, it is the case.
I'm glad it is. I'm glad it does, and I'm glad you do. Yeah, but go on.
Ideally, again, right, we wouldn't have those disasters. I could think about something else. But I'm really hopeful because I see that there's like more collaboration, support each other, right? So that we can just like limit those coordination efforts. And if we have less funds available, I think it's really important to think about how we can also support each other.
Yeah, that sounds great. That's great.
What is your answer?
Sorry?
What are you excited about?
Well, I think that there's nothing like a key motivation of forced collaboration, and I think we can see that. I think that lots of new opportunities to look at when we think about becoming more sustainable as a sector, and I think that it was pretty important before. It's absolutely critical now because. A whole sector focused on philanthropy, as I said, is one that's going to be very challenged in this calendar year and future years. And so, but it's also been very and too fragmented for a long time. I think that's a great motivation to change it. And this is the time. This is the time. Yeah. Well, thanks so much. I think that's all we have time for today. And I want to thank our guest, Susy Schoneberg, for joining me today. I'd like to thank flexport.org and their team for the support that they provide to Airlink and our NGO partners. It's been truly amazing. We're really proud of our relationship with Flexport, as well as very grateful that we couldn't do it without your assistance. And thanks again, Susy, for everybody watching, and thank you for joining us. Please don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. This is Steve Smith at Airlink in Washington, D.C., wishing you and your families good health. Goodbye.